When I was a young mom, barely out of my teens, I was the first person to happen on an accident in my home state of Indiana. This was about 35 years ago when we didn't use car seats or seat belts very much. So I was on a highway, and there was a dad in a car next to me driving, and sitting next to him was his wife, and she was holding their little baby girl. And the car stalled out after it came up over a hill, and a semi-truck came up behind the car and didn't have time to stop and smashed into the back end of the car. And when it did that, the little baby girl was thrown out of her mother's arms into the windshield. And I was the first person to arrive on the scene, and so I saw the dad sitting in shock next to the car, holding his dying baby girl. And there was nothing that I could do to help her, and she did go on and pass away. And those feelings of helplessness, of not knowing what to do in a medical emergency, really stuck with me and became one of the reasons I went on and I got my nursing degree. And when I graduated, I applied at only one hospital, Christ Hospital, on the southwest side of Chicago. I thought I would be safe from such moral and ethical dilemmas like abortion, because who would think that a hospital named Christ could possibly be involved in such a thing? But I came to work one night in my capacity as a labor and delivery nurse, and I received two terrible blows. The first was finding out that the hospital was involved in late-term abortions. I heard in report that we were aborting a second trimester baby that night with Down syndrome. And the second was finding out that the method of abortion that the hospital used, as John was describing, sometimes resulted in babies being aborted alive. And if they were aborted alive, they were allowed to die without any medical intervention whatsoever. The procedure is called induced labor abortion, and we now know that it is common in Australia, and that there have been babies documented who have been aborted alive and allowed to die here too. To commit this method of abortion, the doctor inserts a medication into the mom's birth canal up to the cervix. And the cervix is the opening of the uterus that's supposed to stay closed until you're about 40 weeks pregnant and go into labor. When you're pregnant, your uterus is shaped kind of like a hot air balloon or a light bulb, and at the bottom is the cervix. And doctors who are committing this method of abortion are aborting babies who are small, fully formed though, but they think they are not viable yet. Some are second trimester, early third trimester. So this medication that they give the mom forces the cervix to open up, and so in essence the baby just falls out of the uterus. And that's how it comes to be that sometimes they're aborted alive. My experience at Christ was that somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of babies survived, anywhere from a few minutes to one lived almost as long as an 8-hour shift. And they aborted at Christ anywhere from 19 weeks to one baby was almost 28 weeks old. And in the event that these babies survived their abortion, they were relegated to the hospital's soiled utility room, which is where we take our dirty linens and our dirty instruments, and there's a urinal in there, but that's where they were relegated. Nurses weren't obligated to hold these babies. They were supposed to give them comfort care, wrap them in a blanket until they died, but sometimes they didn't, as I'll get into a little more later. And they were only required to check on the baby every 15 minutes to see if the baby was still alive or not. Christ Hospital says that it compassionately aborts babies with very serious mental or physical handicaps, but Christ Hospital would also abort for life or health of the mother. And so we in the pro-life movement know that abortion for health of the mother is basically just code for abortion on demand. And so several of the babies I'm aware of who were aborted alive at Christ Hospital were completely healthy babies. Now, sometimes the doctors will kill the babies before they start this procedure. Sometimes they won't. In the U.S., it's kind of sifted out that hospitals usually don't, and abortion clinics usually try to. And to do this, the doctor visualizes the baby's heart on ultrasound, and injects through the mom's abdomen a medication into the baby's heart that causes instant cardiac arrest. And so then a dead baby is for sure born. But like I said, hospitals don't usually go that route. They just abort the babies and they expect that the baby will die, by the time this baby is born or soon after that. To a person who believes that every life is sacred, this practice of eugenic abortions was abominable, but it was magnified in my world because the very place that these particular abortions were taking place was at a hospital named after my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. One night, a nursing co-worker was taking a little baby who had survived his abortion, and his parents didn't want to hold him, and she didn't have time to hold him that night, to the soiled utility room to die. And when she told me what she was doing, I couldn't bear the thought of this suffering child dying alone, and so I cradled and rocked him for the 45 minutes that he lived. He was about the size of my hand. He was between 21 and 22 weeks old, and he had been aborted because he had Down syndrome. And he didn't move very much because he was using all of his energy attempting to breathe. And I remember toward the end of his life, I couldn't tell if he was alive or not unless I held him up against the light to see if I could see his heart beating through his chest wall because their skin is so thin at that age. And the feelings of helplessness that I'd had so many years before of watching another little baby die came flooding back to me. Once again, I was in the same situation, and there was nothing that I could do to help this little guy. He was too young to try to resuscitate. And after he was pronounced dead, I folded his little arms across his chest. I tied them together with a little string. I wrapped him in a shroud, and I took him to the morgue where we took all of our other dead patients. After I held that baby, the weight of everything that I knew became too much for me to bear. I had two obvious choices. One was to leave the hospital, and one was to stay and fight. And while I was praying and seeking counsel from my pastor and reading scripture, I came up on a passage that I thought spoke directly to me, and it's Proverbs 24:11 and 12, and it says, "Rescue those who have unjustly been sentenced to death. Don't stand back and let them die. Don't try to disclaim responsibility by saying that you didn't know. For the Lord who knows all hearts knows you knew, and he will reward everyone according to his deeds." And so I thought those were my marching orders. I was called to fight. So I wrote a letter to the religious leaders of the hospital because I couldn't believe that they knew what was going on in the labor and delivery department just a couple of floors over their heads. But they knew. And as a result of my letter, I was called in for a meeting with my department superiors. And they told me that they thought induced labor abortion was the most compassionate way to abort because this method of abortion allowed parents to have closure on the death of their baby because they got to see their baby die and grieve properly. And they said this method of abortion was the most compassionate way to abort the baby because it allowed the baby to be held until the baby died, rather than be suctioned or dismembered as with other methods of abortion. And my bosses told me it would be a shame to lose me, but I might be better suited at another hospital that was more in line with my pro-life convictions. But I told them I wasn't going to leave. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew that I hadn't done enough to try and stop what was going on there. The hospital was and is affiliated with two pro-abortion church denominations. This is something I was naive 12, 13 years ago about and didn't know existed, but they do. The United Church of Christ, which is Barack Obama's church denomination, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America are both pro-abortion. And there are, great Lutheran denominations in America. I want to clarify that, that this is just a liberal wing. But after I wrote this letter to the hospital, and they said they weren't going to stop, we asked some influential people and organizations to write to the hospital, again, privately. We didn't want this to go public if we could help it. People such as Cardinal Francis George of Chicago wrote to the hospital and asked to stop, but said they weren't gonna. And so, as he told them he was going to do, if they didn't stop, my pastor in July of 1999 wrote a letter to 70 churches and pro-life organizations in the Chicago area and around the country, letting them know what Christ Hospital was up to. And it was my pastor's letter that triggered all of the public outcry that immediately ensued. Before I know it, the story was in Newsweek, New York Times, just U.S. News and World Report, just being reported all over the country. It turned out that this method of abortion wasn't publicly known before this time, and the fact that it was first realized at a hospital named Christ was very inflammatory to the Christian community. So news just spread like wildfire. And it turned out that induced labor abortion was not at all rare. Invariably, where I would speak, or if I was on an interview, someone would come up to me after I spoke or call in and say, "Jill, it's going on at my hospital." Well, in April of 2000, according to God's perfect timing of events, while I was having this experience at Christ, there was a bill that was coming to fruition in the United States Congress called the Born Alive Infants Protection Act, as John mentioned. Someone saw the day coming when abortion would leave the uterus, and we would now be arguing whether, the merits of infanticide. And so this was just a simple 3-sentence bill that said any baby born alive, no matter what reason, wanted or not, no matter what gestational age, was a constitutionally protected person. This is how far abortion has brought us. 40 years of abortion, legalized abortion in the United States has brought us. I've testified now 9 times now on the federal level and in various states regarding babies who I knew were aborted alive and allowed to die. And I've actually had legislators argue this to my face. My own state senator, Barack Obama, in 2001, 2002, and 2003, sat on committees before which I testified in the Illinois State Senate, and he argued to my face, and it's on record, that he said his thought was that giving these babies, and we're talking now born babies, not babies who have not been born, but giving born premature babies the same legal rights as full-term born babies, he said, would lead to the overturn of Roe v. Wade, he thought. And so he voted against the bill 4 times, and he also was the only state senator to speak against it on the Senate floor. All of the incidences that I described before them, I gave under oath, I told under oath, and Christ Hospital has never publicly denied that what I'm saying is true, because they can't. I told the legislators about what a support associate relayed to me of accidentally throwing one of these live aborted babies into the trash. She didn't realize that the baby was wrapped in a disposable towel next to the sink in the soiled utility room and accidentally threw the baby away. And while she was going through the trash attempting to retrieve the baby, she accidentally dropped the baby on the floor. I told the legislators about what another nurse co-worker relayed to me of aborting a baby who was supposed to have spina bifida, but who was born with a completely intact spine. And what happened was, on these old grainy ultrasounds, there was an incomplete twin in the placenta. And on this ultrasound, the incomplete twin looked like a mass on his brother's back. But this other little guy was completely fine. And the mom and the dad who were aborting were both doctors. And my friend said that the dad came into the soiled utility room after what he thought was the abortion of his handicapped son, and saw that he had just given permission to abort his completely healthy boy. And she said he didn't say a word. He turned and he left the room silently. And I find this incident particularly poignant because it points out that abortion just doesn't kill children. And abortion just doesn't maim and kill our girls and women. But abortion has a profound impact on men too, as Liz referred to just a little while ago. I'm sure that this guy did not go back to his wife's room and tell her what he knew and increase her guilt and her shame even more. I'm sure that this is something that he lives with by himself to this very day, as so many men do. I'm sure some men in this room tonight have some stories to tell. I told about a situation that a nurse coworker said to me, Jill, I can't stop thinking about it. She was involved in the abortion of a baby who was just over 23 weeks old, or just over the line of viability. The pediatric neonatal resuscitation guidelines say that a baby is potentially salvageable, savable at about 23 weeks and or 450 grams or a pound. Give or take a few grams, a few ounces, give or take a couple days, but right about there, a baby may be resuscitated. So this baby was right on the line, but the mom wasn't going to be able to complete her pregnancy to term. So because the hospital offered choices, they said to her, do you want to try and hold on a couple more days, give the baby a better fighting chance, or do you want to just get it over with and abort? And she said, well, I want to abort. Now, if she wanted everything done for her baby, a team of 4 specialists would have been sent over at delivery to care for this little girl. But because she wasn't wanted, the only people present at her delivery was my nurse friend and an OBGYN resident. And this little girl was aborted alive. And she began breathing on her own. And amazingly, her APGAR scores improved between 1 and 5 minutes. And these are scores that medical professionals give babies when they're 1 minute old and 5 minutes old to kind of assess how well they're doing. This baby all by herself was getting better. But nothing was done for her. She was just kept in the department and rocked for the 2.5 hours that she lived. And the reason that my friend couldn't stop thinking about it is because she too was pregnant, and she too was pregnant with a baby right around the same age as the baby she just helped kill. I had a coworker, Allison Baker, testify with me in Washington, and she told the legislators about one time walking into the soiled utility room to find a live aborted baby laying naked next to the sink. Once to find one laying naked on a scale. And she said that she herself once inherited a patient at change of shift who had just aborted her baby alive and didn't want anything to do with him. And so Allison was running back and forth, carrying, she still had 2 patients. One was in the soiled utility room and one was in a nice room with a bed and, remote control TV. She said every time she would go into the mom's room, the mom would say to her, is he dead yet? Is he dead yet? Well, in the midst of all the congressional testimony I was giving by this time and prayer vigils at the hospital and protests, I continued to work there for another 2 years after I went public. I didn't like staying there, but every time I thought about leaving, Isaiah 8:18 kept coming back to me. And it says, I will wait with hope for the Lord. I am here with the children that the Lord has given me. I do not believe that there's any such thing as coincidence. If the Bible says that not a sparrow falls from the sky without his knowing it, and that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, then we are all at this moment in time for a reason. At this geographical location for a reason. With the sphere of influence, with your work, your family, and your friends for a reason. We may not understand sometimes the reasons for the troubles that we go through, but God never promises us that he'll let us understand. He just asks us to be faithful to him and to believe that he's a good God with good plans. In fact, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. So it's a guarantee. So I submit if we pro-lifers are trying to go through this life and we're not wanting to make waves, don't want to be called right-wing extremists. In the U.S., we don't want to be put on the domestic terrorist watch list, which I probably am. Don't want to, cause controversy at family gatherings or at parties. So we just I wonder how effective of a witness can we really be then? Because I thought my duty was not only to be a witness to people on the inside, but to be a witness to people on the outside, to let you know how horrible abortion has gotten. I watched and I listened very carefully for those 2 years that went by before I was fired, and I heard many heartbreaking incidences. One nurse friend told me about an aborting patient that she had who didn't realize that her baby could be aborted alive. And so not only was hysterical when he came out alive, but also because he didn't appear to have the physical defects that she'd been told he was going to have, which was why she was aborting. So she screamed for someone to help her baby, and my friend ran over to the neonatal unit and grabbed the neonatologist, and he came rushing back, and he quickly assessed the baby, and he had to look the mom in the eye and say, "There's nothing I can do for your son because he was born too soon." And the mom was so traumatized, she had to be tranquilized. And it was left up to this little guy's grandmother to rock him for the only half hour that she would ever spend with him. Another night, while there was an abortion taking place in one room, I had my own full-term delivery in another room, and when it came time for my patient to deliver, I asked for someone to get the nursing assistants to give me a hand, and the nurse taking care of the aborting mom and baby said, "They're too busy to help you right now." And I said, "Well, what are they busy doing?" And she said, "They're wrapping my baby to take to the morgue." And she said, "My baby." And I thought, how insane this is, that there's no one to help me with my full-term healthy delivery only because they're busy wrapping a baby that they caused to die, they killed, to take to the morgue. And sure enough, later on as I was running back and forth getting things that I needed, I happened to glance down the hall at just the right time, and I saw those two nursing assistants carrying that formerly sickly, now dead, baby to the morgue. I've been further shocked at the depths that some people go to, people who call themselves Christians, to protect and defend abortion. In December of 2000, Christ Hospital unveiled its comfort room. So no longer could I go around the country telling people that they were just letting babies die in the soiled utility room. They now took them to the comfort room. This was a small, nicely decorated room, complete with a first photo machine in case parents wanted professional pictures taken of their live aborted babies. Baptismal supplies in case they wanted their aborted babies baptized. And a foot printer and baby bracelets in case they wanted keepsakes of their aborted babies. You may not think that what I'm telling you could possibly be true, but I took pictures of that comfort room and I had them entered into congressional testimony. And you can Google Christ Hospital Comfort Room, the pictures will pop up. Father Frank Pavone made a brochure, A Priest for Life, of my experience, and he included pictures in here of the comfort room, and I've brought several brochures. I'll be right up here on one of these chairs. You're welcome to take some after the event tonight. And actually taking these pictures is one of the ways I got myself fired not too long after that. Christ Hospital wanted me to quit long before they fired me because they wanted me to stop talking and they wanted me to stop having things to talk about, but I wouldn't leave. During the 2 years that went by, I was placed on a 1-year-long final warning twice. So I was on final warning the whole time. I had my picture cut up and I received anonymous hate mail, and one time the hospital's CEO publicly posted a letter about me in the department in several places with my name highlighted and circled in pink. But St. Paul reminds us that the battle really isn't here on earth. It's a battle in the spiritual world around us. And so I do not take anything that was done to me personally, and I also know that I'm on the winning side. The healthcare system that I worked for is one of the 10 largest healthcare systems in the United States, but I happen to know that 1 plus God equals the majority. I happen to know that I have nothing to fear on earth. In fact, God says in Isaiah, I, the Lord, have called you to do what is right. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. Don't be intimidated, I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. But I do have to admit that life at work became more and more difficult as time went on, as you might imagine. I began to feel like I was leading the life of a double agent, flying off to Washington, D.C. 1 minute to testify, and the next minute being so close to abortion that I almost couldn't stand it. And that final night, as I walked through the main doors of the hospital to work, underneath a mission statement that's still there that says in part, all human beings are created in the image of God. So the hospital knew exactly who it was aborting. It had no excuses. I became sick to my stomach and I said, oh God, how long are you going to make me do this? Well, it turned out God's answer was, not that much longer, Jill. This is August 31st, 2001. And when I went in to punch in at the time clock, there was my boss waiting for me, which is an ominous sign. And, you know, when your boss is waiting for you at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, I work midnights. And sure enough, I was terminated and I was escorted out of the hospital with security guards. It was all very exciting. My termination even made the New York Times, page 2, just what I want to be famous for, getting fired. But what Christ Hospital did was blindside me that it was involved in the most despicable moral issue of our generation. And then it told me it wanted me to just walk away. I couldn't because I answered to a bigger boss. And I submit this isn't just the most despicable moral issue of our time. I say we're in the midst of the commission of the worst human atrocity threat of all human history. The Guttmacher Institute, which is Planned Parenthood's research arm, says that in the past 20 years alone, 1 billion babies have been killed by abortion worldwide. 1/7 of the world population. 1,000 million. You know, you name for me one other plague, one other war, one other Holocaust, one other tsunami, one other earthquake that can possibly match that sort of human toll, 1 billion people, and you just can't. We are living now in the worst of times. And people will come up to me and they'll say to me, Jill, I don't think that I could do what you did. And that makes me sad. It makes me sad that I even stand out at all. Because I think, do they not worship the same God that I do? The God who parted the Red Sea? Do they not believe the promises that he makes? If we're faithful to him, he'll be faithful to us. One of those promises is Psalm 25:3. No one who waits for God will ever be put to shame. I banked on that. And in my case, he came through pretty quick. August 5th, 2002. A couple days before that, I got a call from the White House. And it actually shows up on your caller ID, White House. And they said President George W. Bush was signing the Born Alive Infants Protection Act into law, and would I like to be present at the signing ceremony? And I said, well, of course. And I was honored to attend, honored for my family, including my husband Rich, to also go with me and our kids. Well, you may think, well, then these abortions have stopped, right? And the answer is no. As I said, Born Alive is just a 3-sentence bill. There were no penalties attached to it. There was nothing that said, if you violate this law, this will happen to you. So President Bush, it took him a little while to try and figure out ways to try to enforce the law. And then he left office. And believe you me, our current president has no interest whatsoever in enforcing the Born Alive Act. All that said, I do think that a corner has been turned on abortion, definitely in the U.S. Elections lately, our 2010 election, indicate, we're starting to overcome. Polls indicate we are too. Gallup, which is a national polling company in the U.S., has been asking the same question every year of Americans since 1995. Do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice? It's a very simple question. When they started in 95, only 33% of Americans said they were pro-life, 57% said they were pro-abortion, pro-choice. And then slowly through the years, the graph has kind of been narrowing. Then in 2009, for the first time ever, 51% of Americans said that they were pro-life. And this year, the lowest number of Americans ever said that they were pro-choice, 41%. And interestingly enough, Gallup is attributing this change in part to Barack Obama. They're saying that some people may be thinking that, he has been such a shock to the system, Americans' conscience in so many ways, but on the abortion level, he's been so radical on abortion. As somebody said, I think John, who said that? Who before talked about that, he keeps refunding Planned Parenthood when the states defund Planned Parenthood. People are backing up and they're saying, I didn't, when I said I was pro-choice, I didn't really know that that's what that meant. So I don't think I am anymore. So interestingly enough, the radical pro-abortion policies in America are having an effect on the American psyche and converting them. And the day is surely here when pro-lifers will outnumber pro-aborts, because you see, while they continue to abort their babies, we continue to have our babies. And so it's just a matter of time before we win the war by attrition alone. But their babies mean just as much to us as our own babies do, so we must fight on. And each and every one of us is critical to the battle. I received very good advice from Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics early on. He said to me, Jill, do not rely on the media. Do not rely on legislators. Do not even rely on the church. Just rely on God going forward. And Mark was right. If I relied on the media, I would almost always be disappointed. If I relied on legislators, present company accepted for sure, I would almost always be disappointed, or very often disappointed. And I'm sad to say, people in my own church will disappoint me too. But God will never disappoint us. He takes one willing servant and makes the most out of that opportunity. We are his voice, his hands, and his feet. He doesn't have to do that. He could make the rocks cry out, the Bible says. But he does. And the thing is, no one can replace the voice, the hands, and the feet where you sit in your sphere of influence tonight. How did it come to be? 2012, I'm in a beautiful Parliament building, but speaking to this, packed house of pro-lifers about babies being aborted alive at a hospital named Christ. How did, step out of this situation? How did we get here? I don't think it's so different than it was 2,000 years ago when there was another innocent man being put to death. There was that segment of the crowd that wanted him gone. He was inconvenient, getting in the way of the plans that they had, power, money. Then there was that segment of the crowd that said, he's an innocent man, what are you doing? Leave him alone. But then there was Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate said, I don't really like what you have in mind, but I don't want to interfere with your right to choose. So he backed away. And that was one man. And the real problem that we're having worldwide right now is that there are millions and millions, even billions, of Pontius Pilates around us, who if you ask them, they'll say, I don't really like abortion all that much. They will say, yes, it is the killing of an innocent baby. But then on the other hand, what about those exceptions? What about rape, incest, the hard cases? And, my cousin had an abortion, and so they shut down. They go in denial. They become, in effect, Pontius Pilates. And so it's up to us pro-lifers to lull them out of their denial, out of their complacency. And so it is for that reason I am so encouraged by everywhere I'm going in Australia this week, of there being a full house of pro-lifers who are committed to stopping this human atrocity. So I thank you so much for coming out this evening and for letting us use this beautiful room, and for the dedication of Right to Life Australia. All of its workers have been flying around the country and organizing this, and Liz. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Okay. Oh, sure. I think that we were going to have a couple minutes for questions. Is that right, Mary, John? Yes? Does that mean there's a vote? Okay. Yes?
If women don't have replacement level babies and we've got an ageing population, will abortion one end up with euthanasia at the other end because there won't be enough of a tax base to support senior citizens?
I think I understood you. In regard to euthanasia, of course, it stands to reason, number one, that all these children that we've told all these years, we've talked about pro-choice, and if somebody's inconvenient, we can kill them. Why in the world would we think that when these older people, become inconvenient, that they wouldn't be, desirous of them to go too? So there's that problem. Euthanasia is a huge up-and-coming problem. But secondly, the demographics of the world have been changed so drastically by abortion in two areas. Number one, in regard to the number of men versus women born. So many of the Asian countries have a bias against little girls and are finding out through ultrasounds that they're pregnant with girls and they're aborting them. And it's being imported other places. There are studies that show it's happening in the U.S. with cultures that come into the U.S. that would rather have sons and daughters. And so, particularly in China, Southeast Asia, there's a phenomenon now of many more boys being born than girls. It's a demographic lopsidedness we've never seen before in history, so we don't know what the outcome of that is going to be. We're seeing some of the outcomes, such as human trafficking, which is in large part due to the fact that there's a shortage of women. But the other demographic problem is, we're seeing this definitely in China with the one-child policy, but also we Western and Eastern European people buy into this overpopulation myth, and we're having less kids. And so normal society is supposed to be a triangle, with the youngest people being, the most at the bottom of the triangle, and then as you get older, less and less. That's the way we uphold society. But in many societies now, it's become a rectangle where we have the same amount of people, all age groups, and we have an inverted triangle in some places where there are definitely not enough children being born to sustain the older population. And this is another demographic that the world has never seen before. And so there are things that'll be happening in the future that we don't really even have any idea, will be an outcome of abortion throughout the world. It's not just killing children, as bad as it is. It's creating worldwide havoc in ways that we do not yet understand. Yes?
Jill, just to let people know what's happening with euthanasia in Australia, there's the Palliative Care Queensland and a cancer group are trying to get funds to make palliative care a high priority for governments to fund, which is wonderful. However, the way they're going about it is to also have this idea of choice, and so they've had several forums already called Your Death, Your Choice, in which they have actually prospered and promoted the idea that voluntary euthanasia may be something that we ought to consider in the future as a choice for the future. And I need to help people understand what is happening there.
Right.
Because in Canada as well, there's a movement to have palliative care as a human right before then a choice can be made. You've either got this or you've got that. So just to let you know.
Right, because of the demographic shift, there's two problems. Number one, physically there aren't enough young people to take care of older people, such as medical personnel, etc. But also financially, economically, there's not that base of financial support either. And so, of course, that is going to be the next step. And are you familiar with Bobby Schindler? Have you had him speak here yet?
Yeah.
Yes. He says that euthanasia is going to eclipse abortion as a worldwide, human killing problem. And I think he's right. There will never not be a need for pro-life groups. Once we conquer this, there's always going to be other culture of death issues to battle on. I saw a hand over here, yes?
How genuine, with Mitt Romney probably going to get the Republican nomination, how genuine do you think he seems to have had a pro-life conversion, and his rhetoric seems quite good now, but he's probably not been so good in the past. Do you think he's genuine, and how do you rate him?
Well, I do. I like to encourage our converts, and he's a convert. He was definitely very vocal about being pro-abortion when he was governor of Massachusetts, which is a very pro-abortion state, very liberal state. But he had a conversion experience about 2005. And that's when there was a big push in the US for government-funded embryonic stem cell research. And it came through the Massachusetts legislature to his desk. And he had a come-to-Jesus moment, and although he's Mormon. But, he at that realized that, he couldn't be for this. And so he didn't sign that bill, which was a big deal. A government of a liberal state, when the legislature was for it, the population was even for it. When he balked and didn't sign it, that was a good sign. And since then, he said he's pro-life. And so it may not be his top issue, like it might have been Rick Santorum's top issue, but I think that he'll be good on the issue. I'm confident he's going to pick a pro-life vice presidential nominee. The problem is that he isn't inspiring as far as pro-lifers go, basically because some don't trust him, and basically because he's not gung-ho, and so there's a little bit of reticence or not excitement about him. But on the other hand, Barack Obama is creating havoc. He's our alternative. And he is creating havoc in so many ways. When he came to power, he said he was going to fundamentally transform America. Those are his words. And he is on so many policies, including Obamacare, his immigration policy, his support of the pro-abortion lobby, his fight against fossil fuels. I guess you're having that fight here too, but his fight against, energy that we need and pushing green when it's not going to sustain our society right now, on and on. There's this disconcerted sense in America now. If you go up to just about anybody in America, and talk to them about how do you think, we're going here, there's this general feeling of fear. There's something wrong, or this sense that there's something wrong going on in America right now. We're not the country. We're becoming a country that we don't recognize. That wasn't what we were founded on. And so Barack Obama should lose the election. The way he's spent money, the way he's fighting the states on all different counts, he should lose to Mitt Romney. That said, I'm from Illinois, and I've seen Barack Obama rise from the time he was an Illinois state senator. And he even has said that his rise to where he's at today, he said in Audacity of Hope that it's spooky. He acknowledges that sometimes the ways have been parted for him to take the next step that shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have won his Illinois State Senate seat, but he did. He did some chicanery to pull it off, but he shouldn't have won his U.S. Senate seat. Just a couple of weeks before the primary, he was losing, and then his opponent was exposed as a supposed wife beater, and then he won the primary, and then he shouldn't have won the U.S. Senate race, but there was catastrophe on the Republican side, and he won. He should not have won president. In September of 2008, John McCain was winning, and then the economy collapsed, and Obama came through. So I don't know if we don't know if something's going to happen, even if the polling is neck and neck, and Romney is winning in certain key states right now, and you're hoping and it's looking good. You just don't know what could happen, later on this fall, and he could maybe pull it out. We just don't know. So, all we can do is hope and pray for change. Yes? Post-abortion facility? Fertility? Wait, what now? Can you translate for me?
Abortion first. Are you asking about the fertility of women? Is it affected by abortion?
Well, it is. So that statistics have that.
Do you expand on that?
How fertility is affected by abortion? Okay. It's impacted in a multitude of ways. This illicit sex culture has created fertility problems just on the basis of STDs alone, which I'm sure that John could talk about too. But abortion has also caused a lot of infertility problems, with scarred uteruses and fallopian tubes, and also the procedure itself, forces open the cervix when it's not ready to be opened. And so that causes a lot of premature births in the future and miscarriages in the future. Moms can't hold on to their pregnancies. And so that's one reason that we're seeing this huge problem with infertility increase, not just in the US, but around the world.
Just a question, Jill, on the abortion breast cancer link.
Yes.
How strong is that in the US, as in how well is it known and accepted?
Well, there's a huge debate on this in the US. There are many, many, many worldwide studies that say that abortion can cause breast cancer. And these studies go all the way back to the 1940s. And they're not just in one concentrated place, they're all over the world. And it's very simple. If you get an abortion before your breast cells mature, it leaves your breast cells wide open for cancer. And breast cells mature when you have babies. So the other side will acknowledge, if you go to Susan G. Komen or you go to the American Cancer Society website, they will acknowledge reasons that you can avoid getting breast cancer are having children younger. The younger you have your child, the less chance you have of getting breast cancer. And also ways that you can increase your risk is having children later in life, after 35, having less children. The more children you have, the better your odds of not getting breast cancer, or never having children. That's a huge implicated with breast cancer. For hundreds of years, we've known that nuns have a greater affinity toward breast cancer because they don't have kids. Now we know lesbians have a greater chance of getting breast cancer. And so abortion stops moms from having children when they're young, stops moms from having as many children as they should, and also stops moms from having children altogether. And so it's just logic that abortion can cause breast cancer, but the other side is very invested in not letting this reality be a reality. But I think that we can rest assured that just as the tobacco companies tried to hide the fact that tobacco causes lung cancer back in the 1950s and 1960s, that someday it will come out. It will be acknowledged, and also that contraception causes breast cancer too, hormonal contraception. But it's hugely debated right now. We're sticking to our guns, and they are too. But
It's just not well known in Australia at all, even amongst Christian doctors.
Mary?
I'm just wondering, of the babies that are born alive, you were talking about a mother who was traumatised because the baby was born alive. Like, are there ones that say, oh, now I want to keep it? And does then all the push buttons go and they come and save it, or what happens?
Well,
they decide after the termination, they see it alive and they say, oh, that's my baby. And they say, oh, now I want to keep that baby. Do the doctors then get called? Or?
Well, I've never been in the room, but I would say probably that most times they do abort before a baby's viable. There's a point when you can't resuscitate a baby when his or her lungs just aren't mature. You can't put air into something that's not developed yet. And so I know one person in an abortion clinic who aborted her baby alive, and we were just talking about this, a friend of mine now at dinner time at an abortion clinic in Florida. Didn't know her baby was going to be aborted alive. He came out alive in the toilet. She asked for the abortion clinic personnel to help her baby, and they wouldn't. She called 911, and that 911 tape is on YouTube. And they came to the clinic door, and the clinic personnel sent them away and said, no, they just had, a crazy mom. There was nothing, nothing to see here. Go away. And so they did leave. So, you know that probably happens, but chances are great that either the medical personnel are not interested in helping, or even if they could help, the baby might be beyond help. And you've also only got like a 5-minute window to save people. It's just like you or I. if we're without air for 5 or 6 minutes, if we're submerged in a pond or pool or something, there comes a point when you just can't be resuscitated, and it's not that big of a window. And so it probably is likely, even if these babies, might have been saved, that it would take too much time to have the wherewithal to save them. So the odds are not good. Although you've had Gianna Jessen here, she's an abortion survivor, and so it does happen.
I wanted to ask a question to Jill. One of the groups that's emerging around the world, I think, particularly in the United States, are emerging as a pro-life ally, paradoxically, are women who have had abortions. And I wondered if Jill would talk a little bit about that and the impact that's having.
Post-abortive moms are having a huge impact in the U.S. And there are several groups now that are formed of these post-abortive mothers. And so we're not just telling the world now that abortion kills children. We're saying that abortion hurts moms too. And on that note, there are many components to winning the war on abortion. There's politics. We try to get good politicians in. There's the court systems. There's post-abortive moms. There's pregnancy care centers. There's abortion activists on the street, like Liz and her husband. And it takes, I said the other night, it takes a village, which Hillary Clinton, it was a book she wrote, and somebody thought that meant I supported Hillary Clinton. No. But, it is true that on the pro-life, endeavor, it takes a village. It takes all different moving parts with all the different important things that they do to somehow be creating a movement that is upholding the sanctity of life. And the post-abortive moms are a big part of that now, and we're very grateful that they come out and speak out about how they've been harmed by abortion. Yes, Liz?
Jill, I'm just wondering if you could spend a couple of minutes telling us a little bit about your use of the internet and your website to
How I do what?
your use of your website.
Oh,
Internet.
social.
Yeah, social media to really make an impact.
Yes, I gave a whole talk on this at the conference. John says I can do it in less than 5 minutes. I can. I showed a graphic at the conference that in Australia you account for only 1% of the world's computers. But you have 60% penetration in your country. You have the second highest rate of computer access in your country in the world. Second only to North America, which has 78%, but all other continents lag behind Australia and North America, which means that almost all of your kids, are on Facebook, have computers, have cell phones, have messaging, and so there's a huge opportunity in Australia to get through online activism. It's also a huge component now of the pro-life movement in the U.S., and that is on Facebook, talking about the pro-life issue, on Twitter, which I don't think is very big here, and on blogs. I have a blog. And we are going around. You have the same problem here of the mainstream media. It doesn't want to present our viewpoint, doesn't get us. We are a distinct culture. The pro-life movement is a culture that they just do not understand. And they don't necessarily want to understand us. And so when they report on a story, they don't ask the right questions. They don't, talk about the right things. And so blogs and websites are really doing a great job, not just in the U.S. but around the world, of going around the media and covering the issue correctly, or covering things that they don't want to cover that make the abortion industry look bad. And I will also say that I've noticed that the UK press is very honest on the abortion issue, and they will write things a lot more straightforwardly than the U.S. press. I don't know about the Australian press, but I know the UK press is pretty good. So that's something, and it's cheap, and it's something that we laugh in America. You can do in your pajamas, stay home and get online and comment, and and it's inexpensive for rights life groups to get involved with too. Yes?
Just going on with your blog, Jill, explain to them about that ad you mentioned at Melbourne Conference, if you could, and then you went viral. I think that's really.
Yes, a few years ago, our Right to Life group wanted to put an ad in our local newspaper, and it had a box of tissue at the top, and it said, of the ad, and it said, "Excuse me, America, this is tissue," Kleenex. And then at the bottom was an ultrasound photo of a baby, and it said, "And this is not." You know how the other side says these are just blobs of tissue? And it was an ultrasound photo, but the newspaper said that that ultrasound photo was graphic. It was a graphic picture, and so they wouldn't post our ad. And so I complained on my blog, and before I knew it, Fox News, which is a conservative cable news, Rupert Murdoch in the U.S., it's very popular in the U.S., posted our ad on television. And so we had thought, we were hoping maybe hundreds or thousands of people might see it, but millions of people ended up getting to see our ad. And it was only because I had a blog and I was able to have that outlet and complain that it was picked up. And that happens quite a bit. Okay. Thank you very much.